Hello everybody, my name is DreadKyller and welcome back to I guess this is the second episode of Building Toolkit. So, what you are looking at right now is a decent sized plot of terrain. I am currently on the CubeCrowd build team server, so I'm not going to be flying around much in different areas because I could end up spoiling some of the stuff there. But this is my plot that I have on it, and so I'm going to give you a little quick tour, an idea of what I'm going to be doing, and then for the next few Build and Toolkit videos, I'm going to be working kind of on this plot with you, and hopefully building a bit. So, what I kind of imagine for this plot, and it's hard to see because the mountains are actually going outside of the distance now. I think my settings are still saved from 1.8. That should be better. Um, so this is what I have planned for this area. It's going to be heavily forested, and it's going to kind of have a elven style theme to it. It's going to be kind of fantasy. There's going to be a lot of quartz involved, and lots of dark woods. You'll kind of have to just stick around to see what the end result is, but we'll take it stage by stage. Today we're going to kind of go over a little bit about forestry, and more specifically we're going to go over custom trees. But first let me show you what I have so far. I have this boat here that I made, and I have some kind of storage crates, and a lot of this you're going to see a lot of trickery around the area. That's going to be done with World Edit. For example, the floating rails can be done with World Edit, Block and Sniper, but you can't really do it just in game survival. You can do it with MC Edit if you prefer that method. We have a bunch of, this is basically a dockyard. Bunch of storage crates are being piled up here, being loaded onto the ship, and then being shipped off to somewhere. And then the way up currently from here to the mainland is through this cave. Which I like the look of caves if you detail them like this. They can look, you can easily detail them without going overboard. Just because they're caves, they're going to have a lot of this moss and like cobble. They're not going to be very smooth and like perfectly laid out. And that's kind of because we're kind of going with a medieval theme, we're not going with a modern age theme, so we're going to be seeing detailing like this. So if that's not your style, um, then I'm a little bit sorry, but and then for the overhang for the ledges we have some this detailing. This detailing, I don't know how to really explain what my concept there is, but yeah, so there's going to be a good amount of stuff going on. We have some decently high mountains. And I've actually got to fix this tip because this tip is really strange looking. But this is the terrain that we are working with. This mountain gets pretty high. We're not going to really be building up too high on the mountain itself, more near the base. But I wanted this little inset area above a cliff next to the ocean is essentially what I'm going for the location. And then what we build here you'll kind of understand the kind of theme of it pretty soon. When I work on a build, I typically find inspiration from things like music. So that is where I drew the inspiration for this current build, and I've been working on this build for a little bit now. I've kind of actually been installed on it, and so I'm figuring, hey, why not make a video while I'm working on this, and that might boost my motivation to get this project done. So, like I said earlier, I'm going to be going over custom trees today. And the reason custom trees are important is because the vanilla ones are horrible. They just do not look good. If you compare a vanilla tree with the ones we're going to make in this video, you will see why they can add a lot more detail to your build than just spamming a bunch of the vanilla ones. First off, since everyone knows what the vanilla trees look like, it just shows that you haven't put much effort into your build. So we're going to, let's see, I'm going to take some spruce wood, and I'm also going to get spruce leaves and birch leaves. Now I typically use multiple leaves, different colors of leaves. One's going to be our primary and one's going to be just a little bit of an accent color. So let's build a tree right here. Now, if you know the default Minecraft trees, let's just pretend this is oak. They're just extremely basic trees. There's nothing really much to them. We're not going to be building this type of tree anywhere, ever. Instead, let me turn that down because that's a bit loud. Blocks. Okay, so one of the things that you can do to make trees a lot more interesting right off the bat is to simply give it some angles. We're going to make these trees somewhat tall. We're not going to really be skimping out on it. Then we're also going to like kind of add some branches. Now the tree is going to look a little bit strange for the moment because there's no leaves on it, but as soon as we add the leaves on it, this is really going to become quite nifty. That's some decent branches already, but I'd like to probably get this a little bit higher and maybe reach out on some diagonals. Just something like this. Now if you're playing in single player, or in survival I should say, not just single player, multiplayer as well, and you don't have access to things like world edit, you'll have to do a lot of this stuff manually. For me, since I have access to world edit, I'm going to also be turning all of these logs into six-sided logs, which is a little trick you can only do if you can modify the metadata of the block. It basically just puts the bark texture on all six sides of the block if you're unfamiliar with it, and I'll be using that for the trees. You can't do that in survival, so unfortunately you'll have to deal with the sides of the trees placing, the sides of the trees sewing. So for example, if you're making a trunk, you might not want to do stuff like that. You might want to make sure that you have as little of the branches exposed as possible. But the next tip we're going to do, you will have to do manually. I'm going to kind of just do it with world edit. We're going to use a world edit brush. So if you're not familiar with world edit, the syntax is you do 2 forward slashes instead of 1 for most commands. Then the keyword is brush. Okay, now it's looking for what type of brush, so we're going to do a sphere. And we're going to, if you look at that, it says block and the radius. The neat thing about World Edit is that it allows you to do percentages. So we're going to go about 20% air, and that leaves us 80%. Now, a thing that some people don't know about World Edit is I could actually go 500% something else, and it's not actually in percentages. It's in parts. So if I were to do 500, it would be calculating the percentage based on 520. But I'm going to use 100 just to make it easier to figure out math. So 20% air. Then we're going to go 50% leaves. And let's figure out what metadata this is. 1 and 30%. If you know what, I'm going to make this 20%, I think. Yes, there's 20% leaves, and I believe that's leaves 2. Yes. Now, if we were to do this right now, you'd see. Because that's actually not what I expected. It's not doing anything at all. Oh. I'm gonna also specify a size. I'm gonna go 3. Okay, I think I know what's going on. In World Edit, there are things called masks, and I forgot to remask this. I was gonna go over this after an example, but if I just if I do it now, why is this not working? Okay, so I found the problem. The problem was the fact that we just recently upgraded the server to 1.7.10, and just a second, let me close this out because it's lagging me. And we neglected to update World Edit to the latest version, so I just did that, and it's working fine. Okay, so one thing I realized is that the brush I selected was too big. So if I do this right now, you're going to notice that it's actually overwriting the logs, and we don't want that. So what we want to do instead is I'm going to do something called masking, and what this is a mask is we are specifying what blocks the brush is able to actually operate on. So we're going to say mask air, and this means that now the brush is only allowed to actually overwrite air blocks. So if we just go around and spin this brush at the tree a little bit, you'll see that we get leaves covering up almost all the logs. And I'm getting a good amount of frame rate issues for some reason, all of a sudden. No idea why. I'm getting freezing every few seconds. I'll figure that out after the next time I stop recording. Um, so as you see, this tree, right now it looks a little bit strange. We're going to keep working on this a bit though. You just basically want to give it a little bit of volume now that you've actually covered up all the leaves. You want to give it some volume. You want to make sure that the branches span out pretty far, otherwise you'll end up with this and it'll actually be a little bit harder to make look good. It's about time for us to go in and work a little bit manually. But you see the mixture of the that's not actually bad, having a few pieces of the wood sticking out. But the mixture of the spruce and the birch leaves works very well. There's different combinations of leaves you can use depending on what types of trees you are trying to make. For example, birch leaves and oak leaves work well if you're going to be using birch wood. Now this tree came out pretty horrible actually. I don't think I laid the branches out very well. It's taking a lot of fine tuning in order to get this to look decent. Now another issue is that with World Edit, I don't personally, I know there is a way to do it, but I don't personally know the way to make it so that it summons in the leaves that do not despawn. So if you make the tree too big, some of the leaves will despawn, and I'm actually seeing that happening in some places here. I'm just going to add some kind of hanging down leaves. This isn't going to be like a willow tree, but some leaves hanging down typically can make these things look better. I've seen very few cases where it actually hurts the look of the tree. In fact, most of the time it looks far better. Now you can obviously add like vines in to add even more detail. I'm not going to actually go that far here, but you can. So that's not a horrible tree. When you add like more of these style of trees around it, I'm going to make a lot more of them bigger and some of them even smaller. But add a few of these trees around. Another thing is that if you don't like the look of these trees being kind of diagonal like that, you can always add another log there, make it look a little bit fuller. In fact, I'm probably going to do that because to me it looks a little bit thin. So I'm going to go like that. That looks pretty good. And we're also going to kind of add a little bit of a root system down at the bottom here. So just something simple like that. Maybe add a few into the ground itself. And we're basically done with this tree. Now because I have world edit, I'm going to actually use the technique I talked about earlier, and I'm going to turn all these logs into the double-sided logs. And the way this works is, if you look at spruce, you see it has a metadata of 1. The last 4 metadatas, which 13, 14, 15, no, 12, 13, 14, and 15, um, are the metadatas that have the 6-sided textures, and each of those refers to one of the 4 types of default logs, which are the oak, spruce, birch, and jungle. The other 2 woods, dark oak and acacia, do also have 6-sided logs, but they are on a completely different block ID. So what we're going to do here is basically, because we know that spruce, since it's 1, is actually going to be 13, because 12, 13, 14, 15 is still in order. So 12 is oak, 13 is spruce, 14 is birch, and then 15 is jungle. So we're just basically going to replace here, and I'm going to go probably a range of 10, and we're going to go log with log 13. And it would help if I type things incorrectly. And here we go. We now have a bunch of the dual-sided logs, which already you can see that that makes it easily a million times better, or look a million times better. Obviously, you can't do that in survival. I wish you could. It would be really neat if you could do this in survival somehow. But no, unfortunately, you can't. So there is a custom tree. That's only a single custom tree, so let's kind of make another one. And this one I'm going to make a little bit bigger. So I'm going to make this one probably, let's see, kind of go too wide-ish. For the game part, it would help if I wasn't getting lag. God, I'm getting a serious amount of lag. I'm really going to have to check that out, because it's like hindering my ability to do anything. Okay, so right now what I've basically just been doing is just creating a small amount of the trunk, kind of adding some curve in by periodically just switching where these logs kind of start and stop. So I'm going to kind of just repeat that process now and go like this. Around this point is probably where it's fine to make a branch. And this is going to be a much larger tree. There's a few branches so far. Now, whenever you're working with any form of organic, there's always you want to have some irregularities. You don't want things to be perfect or necessarily symmetrical. If things are symmetrical, they're not going to look realistic. Um, and with organics, there's a lot of experimenting. You're not going to probably get it correct the first time. You're going to go through a few iterations first. So I encourage you that if you're going to be trying to make things like this, to just experiment around and see what you can come up with. Some of your own designs will be much better than what I'll be able to kind of show you the ideas to. I'm going to make this one a little bit higher and have shorter branches near the top, just to kind of round the top off a little bit. Kind of go. And this is probably sufficient enough for our tree. We'll make this a little bit longer though. I think that's pretty sufficient enough. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to replace all logs. I'm going to do this first this time. Not that it makes a ton of difference, and then I'm going to also increase the scale of this brush. I'm probably going to go 2, just because it's a bigger tree, there's more spacing between the branches. And I don't want to have to necessarily be spamming the brush too often. But we're going to just basically do the same thing. We're going to basically put one of these balls near the end of each of the branches, and then we fill in the rest of it and add some volume. So by default it will look like that, and that doesn't look that great yet. I want to keep kind of the underside of this because it looks kind of interesting. I'm going to scale this down once. I'm going to add another one of these real quickly. Kind of like the look of this branch kind of sticking out but still connecting. Like that, that looks kind of cool. Okay. So now with the smaller brush I'm going to go around and I'm going to just add some volume into these areas, like for example this little pit here. That's not good. You don't want that, it doesn't look that great. You get things like this, which look very much like the vanilla trees. So we're just going to basically take some of the corners out, kind of round it off a bit. No. So, go. It's a little bit of a tedious process. It's a little bit hard to commentate on exactly what I'm doing because you're constantly just changing things and seeing how they look. And that is essentially that's essentially the entire point. Already this tree is looking pretty decent. It looks a bit better than the first tree I made, at least. And I'm just going to start adding some hanging trees. If we're going to go with one hanging tree in this area, we're probably going to go a bunch of them. This is going to kind of be a magical themed area anyways, so it kind of fits pretty well. So basically just find a point near one of the edges, and based on what type of leaf it is, typically, you just want to like just bring it down a random height. Doesn't need to go down all the way. This might be good to put a little more filler in. I kind of like how this side of the tree looks like it's more exposed than the rest. That's something you would actually find in real life on some trees. If you look outside, if you live near any like forests, you can find some trees where they kind of look like they're leaning over to the side. It's it's surprising that they don't like fall over because they are unbalanced. Since this is a bigger tree, we're going to want to put these a little bit more commonly. So I'm also going to be adding some on the inside as well. Of varying heights. If you're going to do this, you want to make sure you don't have like too many of them just at the same height though, just because that won't look right. It'll kind of look man-made if you do that. What you want is to kind of look more natural than man-made. That's the entire point of doing it organic. So something along the lines of this is a pretty decent tree, and it's going to kind of make this top span out a bit more. Because it doesn't really fit with what's down below. And you get these little pockets sometimes, and that's kind of a consequence of us using air in the brush. But the reason we're using air is to get a little bit of irregularities and stuff. If we just used a pure sphere, we would always have flat sides and rounded corners, as compared to we get a little bit of jaggedness from it, which overall makes the tree look a lot more realistic when it's done. So So, if you can make something that looks pretty much like this, you've definitely made your, I'm not going to say your first, because you might have made one before, but you've made a custom tree. With a little bit of practice, you can make them look really good. This one kind of reminds me now of like the trees you'd find in the dark oak forest. And once again, we're just going to add a small root system to it. Just going to be placing logs because I'm going to be using the World Edit trickery. If you're playing this in survival, just be mindful of where you place them. Some orientation will look better than others. That looks pretty decent. There we go, we have 2 custom trees. Now I'm going to be making a whole bunch more of these and placing them elsewhere, and then I'm going to be kind of spamming them all over this place. So the good thing about trees is you want to make a ton of variations of it. You want variations in size, variations in pattern. So I want a bunch of these taller ones, a bunch of these medium ones, and probably a bunch of the shorter ones. And then I'm going to have some that are full like this, some that are a little bit lighter and don't quite have as many leaves, maybe make something that looks more like a willow tree. So you want to have all sorts of different types of trees um, mixed in. Add some variety to it. If you don't have much variation, then the entire forest is going to look really bad. You also want some different orientation. So when I paste these in, I'm actually going to be rotating them so the trees of the same type do not all look to be the same. For an area this big, I'd say maybe around 15 different variations and maybe 3 to 4 of each of them. for how dense I want this forest to be. Probably closer to the 3, 4 might be pushing this area a bit too much, considering the fact that we're also going to be adding in buildings, so we want to leave some room. But yeah, so this has been Building Toolkit Episode 2. There are a lot of other variations you can do to these trees. You can do birch wood and different types of leaves, and just experiment around. But custom trees are much more appealing than the vanilla ones, at least. So, I hope that you have enjoyed the episode. I am glad to kind of be coming back to YouTube. I have been missing this for a little bit of time, so I don't know when the next video is going to be coming out, but I'm going to be trying to get back into a schedule as soon as possible. So the next video will be relatively soon. Probably not over the weekend, but next week most definitely. So, see you in the next video.